My father was born in Austria, Vienna, April 28th, 1924. Well, it was certainly an interesting childhood. It's a very unusual situation. My father's father was Jewish and his birth mother was Catholic. Unfortunately, shortly after he was born, his father died. And so he was then raised by his aunt. And so he grew up in a Jewish home, though his relatives were not Jewish. And he also grew up poor, so he had no money. And he lived in a Jewish community in Vienna, Austria. And then unfortunately, Hitler started to take over Austria, and the Jews became victims of Nazism. And so my father was sent away from Austria at a young age, at the age of 14. He became a refugee and went on what is called a Kindertransport with many other people, many other children who were in Vienna and Austria and other parts of Europe, went from Vienna to England. And then the British decided to round up anybody who was from Austria and put them in an internment camp.
From England, he was put into the internment camps in Canada. Then the internment camps were no more. And he was adopted by the son of the woman who had him in England. So he applied to McGill University. He was turned down. He applied to the University of Toronto. They had met their Jewish quota. They turned him down. He applied to Queen's University. It's already the middle of November. And the registrar said, "You have an awful lot of catching up to do." He said, "I'll do it." He did. She accepted him. He went to Queen's. He got his bachelor's in chemistry, and he got his bachelor's in art. Got his master's in chemistry. He got his master's in art. He got a PhD in chemistry from Harvard.
My parents met really right away when my father arrived here in Milwaukee. He arrived in 1950, and they met then through a friend of hers from college, from Downer College, and they started dating. And they actually got married 2 years later in 1952. He was working as a paint chemist for Pittsburgh Plate Glass. And he was here the first couple of years just as a chemist researcher, but he was also really interested in the Jewish community, so he began working in the Jewish community. He began to be a Sunday school teacher at Emmanuel here in Milwaukee as well.
I first met Dr. Bader at Sunday school. Congregation Emmanuel was a Reformed congregation on the east side of the city of Milwaukee, and Dr. Bader was actually a much sought-after Sunday school teacher. In those days, kids didn't like Sunday school anyway at all, and thought it was a fairly waste of time. But Dr. Bader made it interesting, and he also made it interesting by giving kids semi-precious stones when they performed appropriately, or as appropriately as he wished for them to perform.
A lot of his friends he met through teaching their children, and he taught there from the early 50s until I am 30 years old. And people still talk about him as being their best teacher.
He and his wife in Milwaukee started their business in the garage. When he was at Harvard, he had a terrible time getting some of the chemicals he needed to do his thesis. Kodak was the only one who supplied the chemicals. He wrote them once a week, every week, to the point where they said, "Please don't bother us. We'll send it to you when we have it." And he was getting a little frantic. Well, he graduated after he got his materials from Kodak finally. And he thought, that's what I'll do. I'll package the materials in small quantities.
A lot of the people that bought the chemicals were researchers or university chemical labs, that kind of thing, and other large chemical companies. He was striving to offer more different compounds than anybody else, and when he was really just starting.
The first year he made $1,700. The second year, he added some different compounds, and they made $4,400. The third year, they were really doing well. And the fourth year, he bought his own building. So that was the beginning of Aldrich Chemical.
It was a pretty young company when I first came to work there. I think there were, all told, about 35 people working there. That includes Alfred and me. You know, we were in a predominantly black neighborhood there, even by that time, I would say. And many of the employees were black people. The people I worked closest with were.
But Alfred said he had a great desire to improve the community. And so when he had an opportunity, he built his factory in a heavily black area in Milwaukee. His objective was to have 30 to 35% of the people working for Sigma, actually his company at that time was Aldrich before they merged with Sigma, to be black. A very interesting approach. Many people say they want to make changes, but how many people take actions to make sure that that's done?
Living in the Bader household in Milwaukee, my father was a PhD and had friends in the PhD world from chemistry, but also from art history. He was also a dedicated Jew, so he had a lot of friends from the religious world. So our house was sort of a combination of a museum, but also a think tank. So we had people coming in from all over the world to talk about chemistry with him, to talk about art history with him. He also was a businessman, so he would invest in not only his own company, but other companies as well.
I was in a carpool with Alfred's wife, Helen, because our children were going to the same school. And shortly after the carpool started, Alfred invited us on a Sunday afternoon for tea. We came to his house, and lo and behold, the walls were just covered with paintings. And when we asked questions about the paintings, he gave us lessons, not only in the artist and who painted it, when it was painted, but also the Bible story. It was like the beginning of an introduction to Alfred because he liked ABC, art, Bible, and chemistry. And he was an expert in all of those fields. It was really quite impressive. So we learned a lot, and it was the beginning of a long, at least a 50-year friendship with him.
He loved taking us under his wing, and Larry and I love art anyway. So it was just, honestly, in our lives, I don't think we would have imagined meeting someone that had Rembrandts in their living room. It just, you don't think about that very often. It's just something you see in a museum.
Alfred and Leonard wrote a paper together for Physics Today, a journal, and the article was about a chemist physicist who lived in the 19th century, and Alfred didn't think that he was well known or even known in the English-speaking world, and he wanted this person named Loschmidt to get the justice that he deserved.
I think Alfred really was a person. For him, the fairness was important as a high value. And Loschmidt didn't get his credit during his life. So I think Alfred was interested to somehow fix this unfairness and give more credit to the Joseph Loschmidt.
He was terribly upset by his experience of being marginalized during the war, by the cruelty shown to the weak by the Nazis, and more generally in normal Western go-getter society.
Fascism was a big part of our education from him, and it was always part of our life to find people that were rather authoritarian, and then also appreciate people that weren't. And if he saw somebody being mistreated, he would get out and yell at the people that were mistreating them. He told us to stand up for people and what was right. That was a really big part of, I would say, both my parents in education of us, and we still today have that.
My parents' marriage started to struggle, and my parents divorced. My father originally met Isabel Bader in 1949 when they were on a boat. And so this was in Quebec, Canada, and he met her, and he fell in love, and he proposed to her. But she came from a Protestant family and knew that she would not be allowed to marry a Jew. My father then re-met Isabel in 1976, many years later, when he was on a trip to Europe, and they started talking. And then Isabel and my father got married. So my father retired from Aldrich Chemicals and then really focused on his art and really built up that business for many, many years.
He started Alfred Bader Fine Arts in the Astor Hotel in 1991. And he grew the business, and he bought for the company when he would go on buying trips. Work, work, work. He was a workaholic. He worked 6 days a week, which I did not know. And I had to get the work done in 5.
One of his missions in life was to educate himself continually, and that involved work, 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 read, 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 and write, and correspond with experts in the fields that he was studying. And that was never ending.
You see, virtually every chemist who is working in an academic environment knew the name of Alfred Bader, because in every lab you find the catalog of Aldrich. I remember the day very well. I was in my lab. Suddenly a phone call came in, and they said, "You have to come immediately to Café West End. Alfred Bader wants to speak to you." And I said, "Alfred Bader, the famous Alfred Bader?" So in reality, Alfred Bader is the Jeff Bezos of chemistry. The role which much later got Jeff Bezos by delivering everything perfect, very well, to be everywhere there. He did this, but in a much higher quality.
My connection with Alfred Bader was established simply because of a job offer from Queen's University to become a Bader Chair of Southern Baroque Art. And when I accepted the offer, my first call was to Alfred Bader, of course, and that was also one of the very interesting moments, because I thought, okay, here's this German coming along and phoning Alfred Bader saying I'm the new Bader Chair. But it was very nice, and I phoned him in English, of course, and he answered right away and said, "Herr Professor, wir können doch Deutsch sprechen." So that was a very good start, I would say.
He gave lectures on both chemistry and art, and he would fit that in with his travels. He would go to England and then Germany and speak at Dresden University. He'd speak at Oxford. He'd speak everywhere.
So whenever I go to one of these lectures, I go right up to the front. And Alfred's voice was very, very soft. I had no idea who he was, by the way. It was a fascinating talk. And then he invited everyone in the audience, and there must have been 80 or 100 people, I think, in the audience, to come up and visit his gallery. You had to call for an appointment. So I did that the next day. He told me few, if any, people have ever taken him up on his offer. And his place was in a hotel in downtown Milwaukee, like a hotel room. I found that fascinating here. And we talked, and I saw something I liked, and I came back 2 or 3 days later and bought it from him. He also had a lot of peculiarities that I loved. For example, he would send you letters. I have a whole bunch of letters from him, and he put all these different stamps on them. All these very, very pretty stamps.
Once, towards the end of my time at Queen's, Alfred and Isabel said, why don't you bring a few of your doctoral students to Milwaukee to visit us and have a look at our collection? And I must say that was very emotional in many ways. I mean, I had heard so much about this collection. I had heard so much about their home. They talked about it, and then they invited us. And so we went with, I think, 2 or 3 professors and a few doctoral students to Milwaukee. The whole house was crowded with pictures, even in the kitchen and the bathrooms, everywhere. And being art historians, we were, of course, able to notice that they were not just any pictures, but really, really important old master pictures all over the place. And so that was very impressive too.
We invited them for holidays, and he came to us and he noticed that we had a lot of wall space.
So he walked into our house and he says, in the way only Alfred could say, he took a look around the room and said, I envy this. And we're like, you envy what? He said, I envy your wall space. So he said, you must come to the gallery and I guess see how we could fill up this empty wall space, which over the course of many years, we did.
We did become customers. First we were friends, then we decided to start buying paintings from him, and he helped us accumulate paintings, and he picked them for us. So I told Rana, I said, well, who's better to pick these than Alfred? I mean, he is the expert, so let's listen to him. And we did. And we learned from him, and he taught us about the artists. And it was a journey, many, many years, and a lot of fun.
I think Alfred's approach to art was both emotional and rational. He certainly looked very closely at pictures, and he certainly had a very good eye for quality, the execution of a painting. And he was especially proud when he bought Rembrandt paintings that experts had considered to be school or later. And then after a while, by the Rembrandt project, for example, a famous Rembrandt research project, the paintings he bought as non-Rembrandts were accepted as Rembrandts. That was about his biggest success.
For many years, my dad was a very avid philanthropist, really loved investing in the community, really loved getting to know people. So he engaged with people all over the world. People would be calling him all the time, visiting him all the time from all over the United States.
You should understand that my way of working with Alfred was that I would have this general guidance in mind, and then I would look for projects accordingly. And this started from that original check, help the most needy persons you encounter, and it lasted the whole time of my cooperation with him. So trust and gratitude as an initial prerequisite for helping, and as long as that was preserved, his only question was, come back to me when you need more. How can we help more? Somewhere in the background were the strength of his instincts, his ethical commitments, and his shrewd judgment of men and events.
He had the stroke in England. When he came home, he walked with a cane, and it wasn't too terrible. We put him up in the hotel down the street at the Knickerbocker. He had been coming to the office every day. And then it became like 3 times a week he'd come to the office. And his wife would drop him, and then I would bring him home. Until he fell. And that was the last time he came to the office. So I would go to his home, and we'd get things done. But he did not go to England again. He stopped his traveling. And then it was downhill. Over a 5-year period, he just went downhill fast. But boy, he was lucid until a month before he died. I just closed Alfred Bader Fine Arts in May of 2022 and put the paintings in storage. all of it went to Queens. He was a legend, but he was a living legend, and he refused to believe it. He refused to believe it.
So one of his most living legacies is the Isabel and Alfred Bader Foundation, and that is part of Bader.org, which includes my mother's foundation. So the staff at the Bader Foundation is always looking for the roots of family's values and the work that he wanted to achieve during his life in all the areas that he and Isabel were interested in. We're trying to call it a good energy organization that walks out in the community, able to talk to people of every different walk of life with great clarity and great empathy. And that's part of who he was.
You know, he was extraordinarily smart, a really, really smart guy. He had a tough childhood, but he used those opportunities that he had. He used his intelligence, he used his business acumen to really create something that was amazing and incredible, but also really to help others. And that was really what it was all about. He was a person with a lot of passion, a lot of commitment, that was really dedicated and committed to helping other people.
We must do everything we can to help people. The most important commandment in the Torah is tzedek, tzedek, tirdov, justice. What are we trying to do? All of us are created in the image of Hashem. We're all created by Hashem, not just Jews, all of us. And the key is to try and help people. I read the book of Ruth. It should really be called the book of Naomi. Here you have a Jordanian woman, Ruth, saying to her wonderful mother-in-law, "Your God shall be my God, your people shall be my people." And out of that love between Ruth and Boaz came David HaMelech. Out of a Jordanian and an Israeli. I hope peace is possible. Probably not in our lifetime, but it should be possible.